Welcome to our new program webinar. Welcome also to those in the audience who are not currently members. So this is an open webinar where we give prospective members the opportunity also to see what we're doing and to comment. I'm just going to introduce the presentation, and then Gareth and Andrew will take you through the detail of what we've produced so far. So if you go to the first couple slides, those are really by way of introduction for those who don't know ICDP so well. We boldly describe ourselves now as the authority on automotive sales and after sales, and we believe that's justified on the basis of the breadth of the research, the detail of the research, and how it has tracked accurately to the actual trends if you look back over the last few years. The focus of what we do is forward looking. It's not so much what's the profitability of dealers today, looking 5 to 10 years out, and that's picked up in various publications. We're invited to various conferences, and we have the range of publications you see there. In terms of the structure, then the heart of what we do is the collaborative research program, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So what do we do within that research program for next year? And then around that, and often derived directly from it, then we're doing consulting work for a combination of members and non-members, and the data services. So if you look at the research members themselves, then I'm pleased to say we've had to make the box a little bit bigger as the number of members has increased. And you look across there, then you'll see there's a good spread of manufacturers, of private distributors and dealer groups and their trade associations, and from the aftermarket, some suppliers, some operators, and also providers of sort of IT and services and e-commerce platforms and so on. I won't ask you to pick out the newest members. We'll show you that on the next slide. Over the period since the summer meeting, we have welcomed Bertolo Steen, which is one of the largest dealer groups in the Nordics. And then more recently, pleased that Ineos Automotive, who you will recognize as the manufacturer of the 4x4 in the spirit of the Land Rover Defender, I think is probably the legally appropriate way to describe it, have joined, which is great news. We've talked about clean slate. They have that clean slate, so we're looking forward to having them on board as members. And then also Carwow, who again we've talked about in the past on many occasions as a trusted platform for consumers. Some would say disruptors, we would say not, but they obviously are very active in the UK, in Germany, and in Spain, where we were told a couple of weeks ago that they've now signed up most of the Spanish dealers. So very interesting in the current context of change in the distribution system to find out what they're doing. And then also joining from January, we have Hug Coburg, so one of the leading German insurers, and one that we've covered in the past in some of the research because of some of the innovation that they've introduced, in particular in terms of their relationship between themselves and their repair network. So a nice spread of new members and a couple of other discussions underway. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Gareth, who will take you through the results of the survey and the basic structure of the proposed program.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. So just to start with, I'd just like to cast your mind back to what we've done over the past year, the past research programme, and our 2020 to 2021 European research programme, which we called Preparing to Enter Uncharted Territory, has looked at and continues to look at over the next 3 months or so, the pressures facing the industry. So we've looked at how, or pre-COVID predicted market downturns. We've looked at increasing globalization and the protectionism that brings about, environmental concerns, car usage restrictions, and the associated regulation behind these, changing products and technology, network profitability and overall viability. We've looked at the threats and opportunities that new entrants pose. And we've also looked at the underlying drivers of digitalization and regulation. And from these, we did identify 3 key themes which have informed and directed all the work that we've done over the past year and will continue to do through towards the programme for next year. And these were primarily digitalization, so looking at the impact that the increasing digitalization in both sales and after sales processes, but also in car ownerships, in how dealers, importers and also OEMs have run their businesses, and what the impact that has had on the sector and will continue to have. We've looked at relationships in the form of how the industry as a whole can build stronger partnerships between players, whether that's between OEMs and dealers, or between even the franchised and independent aftermarket. And then that final key theme of product and technology change. So how new products, such as changes to ownership models, and also new technology, such as electric vehicles and connected cars, how they have and how they will continue to affect companies across the automotive value chain and how they do business. So this is an overview of the 3 key themes that we identified for this year's research programme. We still think that these 3 themes are going to be relevant to the industry today and for the next 5 to 10 years going forward, as Steve has said. And I think this is evidenced quite nicely by the 3 news headlines that are shown on the slide. In the top right, the BMW Group and AWS team up to accelerate data-driven innovation in the automotive industry. So this shows how BMW and Amazon have teamed up to use data and analytics to improve both production and also distribution capabilities. And I think that this really highlights the continued importance of digitalization, but also in building stronger relationships, and that's including with non-automotive partners. At ICDP, we've been talking about agency for a number of years and how now it's increasingly a hot topic in the industry, with a number of OEMs rolling out agency in some markets. And that quote, or that news headline in the middle, highlights that nicely. European car retailing poised for shake-up as agency model gains support. And this clearly closely ties into an omnichannel offering, focusing on systems integration and building partnerships with agents. But it also highlights the product and technology change angle quite nicely, because agency does enable a build and operate style distribution model. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment, but agency has also been much requested in a lot of the feedback we have received so far. And I think it really encapsulates those 3 themes of digitalization, relationships, and product and technology change. And then finally, the article on the bottom right, VW exec complexity to drive consolidation. I think that this really highlights how increasing complexity due to what we call the ACEs, so autonomous cars, connectivity, electrification, and sharing, how these ACEs are pushing OEMs to collaborate, but it also extends to a need to collaborate with other partners, such as OESs, parts distributors, etc., to improve the maintenance and repair experience, but also improve the overall ownership experience for consumers and the experience for dealers and OEMs going forward. So those 3 themes, digitalization, relationships, and product and technology change, as I said, are still as relevant to the industry today as they were when we started our research programme this year. But these aren't the only pressures that the industry is facing. We are living in quite unprecedented times at the moment. The big spectre looming over all of our heads, and that has affected all of us, is clearly coronavirus. We've seen the impact of COVID on repairers last week in our Repairer Economics webinar, but we've also tried to keep you up to date on the whole picture. We've had standalone webinars looking at the impact of coronavirus in different markets. We've had slots at our main meetings touching upon some of the issues that it's caused. But looking forward, the longer term impact of coronavirus on consumer behaviour, for ownership, for vehicle usage, and for purchasing is unknown. But I'd say it doesn't actually feel far-fetched to imagine a continuing reduction in annual mileage, especially for business cars, or for a continued reliance on online channels during car purchasing processes or booking a car in for after sales, etc. So that is one of the things that we are living in that's going to have an unknown impact going forward. And I think the other spectre that is looming over our heads, at least for those of us in the UK, is the longer term impact of living in a global economy and what that impact will be. And in particular, the challenges that Brexit will bring to distribution in Europe. How closely will the UK follow EU regulation? And will any deviances mean changes to distribution models? So living in an increasingly global world is bringing those unprecedented challenges to the industry. Moving into this decade, so as we go through the 2020s, emission targets will become increasingly important. They will help drive product and technology change as manufacturers strive to meet EU targets or face fines. But also at the same time, as we see usage restrictions and purchase restrictions, as cities ban the use of ICE vehicles, and then as countries potentially even bring ICE bans forward. So those emissions targets and the need to meet them is going to have a big impact on where the industry will go in the next 10 years. We're also now in the block exemption review process, and Andrew brought us some excellent insights into the current state of what's going on and where we think some of the elements may go on the first day of our autumn meeting. But we still have a long way to go with this process. Any changes to existing rules could have significant impact on a number of business areas directly affecting all players in the industry. And finally, we're seeing new entrants come in with the potential to shake up the established norm and disrupt existing players, or to slot in neatly alongside them and just steal market share. And whether that is new OEMs such as Rivian or Ineos, or new service providers focusing on improving the sales processes for new or used cars, or even for after sales, we think that there's significant potential for disruption, or just, as I said, stealing market share. So these are some of the things that have informed where we've got to in our plans for the next programme year. Hopefully they'll give you a flavour of what's gone into that and help direct our plans. But we also do rely heavily on members and the feedback you provide on the areas that are of direct interest and direct relevance to your business operations, and where you feel that we can provide the most value. So this year we have received a significant amount of feedback already. So thank you very much, those of you who have provided this. But I'd also like to point out, it's not too late. We would always welcome any further feedback. So if you've not provided that, please feel free to fill in the form that you were sent, or to just send us an email with any comments, etc. We'd be very happy to receive more feedback on this. So just to touch upon some of that feedback, the slightly illegible table on this slide is derived from the feedback that we've received, and it shows a heat map of the topics and the type of insight that members would like and value from ICDP and what we can bring to the table. And I won't go into a lot of the detail on this, but I think there's a number of basic takeaways that we can kind of use to inform and direct this year's research programme. So firstly, the feedback indicates that there's strong demand for what we've termed understanding the market on most topics. This is that leftmost column highlighted red. This is where a lot of the requests for information from ICDP come on. So we just like, the members would like to understand what's going on in the space of dealer networks and distribution formats, which is something we cover in ECDH, but also in a lot of the other work we do, for example. So understanding what's going on is quite a key demand from our membership base. But also we're seeing quite strong demand for looking at the impact of digitalization on new and used cars in particular, but also even more strongly on distribution models and dealer networks and distribution formats, again, in particular. And this comes down to that keyword that we've already talked about, agency, and we'll touch upon that a little bit later on. Generally speaking, sharing, the impact of sharing on some of the key topics has been the least requested area of input. It just doesn't seem to be something that is in everybody's minds at the moment, perhaps given some of the more short-term influences that we've seen. And at the bottom of the table, regulation. We had a number of topics under this, and generally speaking, the feedback from members has been that an overview of what's going on in all of these is where the areas of feedback would most be. We did ask whether you'd like input on future strategy. There's been mixed feedback on that. Some of you are very interested, some of you are less interested. The areas where there is more demand for that is on the new and used cars and the network and distribution model side of things. And we've also asked whether you'd be interested in change management and implementation And again, that's been kind of less requested, but more strongly on the new and used and the networks and distribution model side yet again. So this is the quantitative feedback that we've had. And as I said, it is directly informed what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of slides with this year's programme. But we've also had qualitative feedback from members. And I won't go into all of these, but this does help highlight the importance of those three themes that we've talked about. Digitalisation, those blue quotes, relationships, the red quotes, product and technology change, the green quotes. So you can see, just going through some of those blue ones, the growth of digital retailing. How can demand-led data, again, digitalization, heavy themes, expectations from consumers on factors such as price transparency and ease of making comparisons, again, driven by digitalization. And then outright in the last one, digitalization of sales and service process. Relationships, people would like to know how impact of agency is going to, what the impact is going to be on franchise dealer networks. Some would like to know what OEM strategies are going to be for targeting the independent aftermarket. And then another one was understanding the impact of block exemption on dealer repair agreements. But also that product and technology change thing, the impact of the ACEs and the impact of new entrants are some of those things we've talked about. So a lot of what we've been discussing already today is backed up by direct quotes, by direct comments, qualitative feedback from members as being areas of significant interest. So I'm going to hand over now to Andrew to talk you through some of the plans in a bit more depth about what we will be looking at over the next, or what we're planning to look at over the next year worth of research.
Okay, thank you, Gareth, and good morning, everybody. So what we'd like to do over the next few slides is just to show you how we're bringing together and how we're shaping the combination of your feedback, and as Gareth says, we've had a good quantity of it, for which thank you very much. So how we're combining that with our own ideas and how we're going to build on existing bits of work we've been doing over the past 12 months and beyond, how we're bringing those together into a plan for the new programme, which will start on the 1st of April next year. So what we plan to do, as Gareth suggested, is to very much follow those three key themes that structured our current year of work. So digitalisation, what difference will digital everything make? Relationships, so all the issues around how to build stronger channel partnerships and what choices sit behind that. And product and technology change, a constant and an accelerating one. But we'll develop things further by focusing on how different players could choose to move forwards. And that gives us our programme title for next year. You'll have seen it in the footer at the bottom of the slide, Making Choices and Managing Risks. And we've chosen a chess game as the image that sits behind that to sort of underline the strategic choices and trade-offs that different stakeholders within the sector will face in addressing future challenges. So how could we choose, how should we choose to move forward, very much sitting underneath what we plan to do next year. So if we just move on, and under that heading of making choices, managing risks, we've chosen a kind of circular approach, so a circular graphic to illustrate that. So looking at the new car market, used car market, and particularly at the growing range of digital and other services supplied around the car, then looking at the aftermarket in the broad sense, so after sales, repair and maintenance, crash repair and spare parts distribution, on through regulation, critical influence on how the sector operates, and looking at how all of those flow through into the choices, the risks and the forward strategies under the networks and distribution models heading. So if you look under the four quadrants that make up the circle, you'll see a number of familiar topic areas under each one, shown in those rectangular boxes around the side. Topics that are pretty familiar from our work over the past few years, but you've confirmed their continuing relevance and importance for you. So everything through consumer behaviour, both private and increasingly fleet, issues around supply chains, and also alternatives to ownership and mobility services through all aspects of the aftermarket, whether it's franchised or independent, looking at which way the market will head and the impact through on all stakeholders, but also including parts suppliers and parts distributors. A number of different areas of regulation, we'll come back and talk about those in a minute, through into, as we say, the network and distribution model, trends and choices as we look to build omnichannel. Should we choose agency? Should we look at direct channel? Should we evolve the franchise networks we have today? What are the systems needs that sit behind that? And what do we do? How do we respond? And what choices will new entrants and new disruptors make? And what we'll do now is just sort of flesh out each of these a little bit for you to give you a flavor of the issues that you've raised, and Gareth has touched on a number of them already, and the perspectives we plan to adopt in addressing each of them next year. So if we have a look at the first one briefly, new and used cars and that broad range of services in the broad sense, a strong underpinning of this, as in previous years, will be looking to understand consumer behavior, how it's changing, and how that in turn is driving the responses that need to be made. So if we try and divide the issues under our three key themes, as we said, of digitalization, relationships, and product and technology change, digitalization, yes, we'll continue looking at how consumer buying journeys and attitudes to choices of products, services, and channels are changing, including in there the use they're making of third-party platforms. In particular, just to pick on the bottom bullet in that list, as we see a growing blurring of the traditional boundaries between the new and used car markets and new and used car buyers, how are those buying journeys evolving? And what's the supply chain response, looking at the one in the middle, that we need to better match available supply with customer demand across both new and used cars. In the middle, under relationships, we'll continue to look at evolving attitudes to car ownership and usage, particularly as we hopefully start to move into a post-COVID environment. Quite when that starts, we're not sure, but a number of conflicting trends in that area. Indications that, of course, we all want to drive individual cars just at the moment, and that will probably persist for a while, but at the same time, growing awareness of environmental sensitivities and a range of restrictions, but also sort of looming changes in fuel types, petrol and diesel, new car sales, bans on the horizon, and all those sorts of issues to look at. Feeding through from that, understanding how the customer experience, the ownership experience, works alongside their new or used car, particularly as a result of connectivity and then the different account services we're now offering, and where the potential value in all of those apps and services might lie. And that's a question that's frequently being asked at the moment. Finally, under the kind of products and technology change heading, lots of comments around the need for us to continue to track the evolution of the whole EV value chain. So how it differs from ICE cars, where different stakeholders will make their money, and how those revenue sources will alter, but also to look at developments in the fleet and business car market, again reflecting changes in ownership as we hopefully come out of the COVID period. Will we see a lasting change in the structure and usage of business cars, but also as we continue to see B2C, business to consumer lease offers expand, a greater move to monthly payments for all of us, and a growing proportion of car parks under active fleet management, and what that will continue to mean for the sector. And that links into what we'll talk about next in the aftermarket as well. So if we do just turn to after sales, again here, lots of comment around how we can continue to add value for you in understanding the evolution of the aftermarket under the influence of car park changes, customer behavior changes, and technology changes, and so what that means for the size, the structure, and the relationships in service and repair, in spare parts distribution, and also in the crash repair market as well, a sector that's been particularly hard hit over recent months, thanks to us not driving anywhere very much. So here again, just to look at those three headings briefly, we'll be looking at the impact of digitalization on all aspects of the aftermarket. So whether it's connectivity in the car, whether it's improved connectivity throughout the parts ordering and supply chain, or whether it's affecting repair and maintenance and crash repair operations actually in the workshop, and linked to that the role of systems and processes, and if you like, omni-channel in after sales in this developing managed after sales picture, as we say, with a greater proportion of the car park having its after sales needs professionally managed. That feeds through into the relationships column, into thoughts around how the market shares of respective operators will develop, franchised and independent, and what opportunities there might be for greater franchised independent sector cooperation, collaboration, in our Aftermarket of Tomorrow report, published back in the spring. I hope you've had a chance to look at it, and if not, by all means, let us know. We talked about co-opetition, so a combination of competition and collaboration as characterizing the way the franchised independent aftermarket interplay is developing. So we'll continue to build on that theme and what it means for the relationships between parts suppliers, parts distributors, and repairers of all types, and also where third-party online platforms in particular fit into that picture between the customer and the repairer. All of this moving across to the right-hand side and the product and technology change column will be underpinned by an update to our regular projection model, which looks at future aftermarket size and structure, both for repair and maintenance activities, but also for crash repair as well. As we say, in the face of this behavioral change and this technology change we're seeing, in particular, including updating our understanding of the nuances between electric vehicles and internal combustion engine vehicles in that future aftermarket picture, what that means for market share, for profitability of different types of player in coping with those different product types. So plenty to keep us busy in the aftermarket as ever. If we just move on under the heading of regulation, as Gareth already mentioned, we'll continue to monitor and report on the block exemption review, a key factor in future networks, both on the sales and after sales side for the sector in Europe over the coming years. Will continue to dominate regulatory debate, but there are many other relevant areas of policy that will affect the sector that we've been looking at already and will continue to look at. Again, splitting into those three column headings, we'll be tracking the growing influence of, if you like, online competition or digital competition and issues around data growing in policy activity, both within Europe and nationally, and likely to be major factors both within the block exemption review, but also in many other areas of regulation as well. So issues around control, use, sharing of customer data, and how competition between online and offline players should evolve. As I say, that fits into our continued monitoring of the BER debate, the review, which will include all the different dimensions within that, including, as Gareth says, that choice of agency versus franchise, whether any changes will occur to the attractiveness of either format as a result of how the rules develop. We know that's a key thinking point for many in the sector at the moment. Alongside that, we'll continue to give updates on environmental policy issues, including the progress towards now the 2030 CO2 emissions targets, which look set to be strengthened following European Commission's latest policy announcements towards the end of last week. Access to connected car data that we reported on just before the summer break, and which will continue to evolve over the coming year, and also usage restrictions as they continue to feed into city life in many areas around Europe. Plus, just picking on the middle bottom column, once the dust has settled, if indeed the dust is going to settle, there will undoubtedly be some issues and some things to review around Brexit and what that means for the sector, particularly around the prospects for the UK taking a different path in the future in relevant areas of regulation for the sector. So again, lots to look at, building on topics that we've been addressing this year and previously. But as I said, when I showed you that sort of circular graphic just a few slides ago, these three topic areas all feed into the fourth one on networks and distribution models, where we'll be continuing our current work looking at the challenges of implementing, of integrating an effective omnichannel network strategy. What are the ingredients? How do we bring them together in a way that that works efficiently, effectively, doesn't cause duplication of tasks and responsibilities, and which gives customers that kind of seamless experience we know they're looking for and increasingly getting in other sectors of business. So, I mean, as this year, there's so much to look at here that it's quite hard to split it under the three headings. And as Gareth showed you on that heat map, you had a lot to say in this area, and we would expect that. But just to kind of split them up as best we can, under digitalization, we want to continue the work we reported on in our extended webinar a couple of months ago, looking at the systems environment, the retail systems environment, and how that's becoming ever more critical element of omnichannel in linking together OEMs, dealers, customers, and indeed other stakeholders as well. We also want to, again, from the omnichannel perspective, look at how best to balance the costs, the investments, the rewards, and the channel functionality that you need across physical and digital channels in omnichannel. So what does it make sense to have each channel do, online and offline? Who takes care of the investments? How do they work? What's the payback? And how do we motivate, incentivize, and measure performance across those different channels? I mean, that sits very much behind the top bullet in the middle column there, tracking and assessing existing and newer approaches to retail formats, including agency. Key questions in agency about how omnichannel works, how pricing is operated, how network investments are operated. So we'll continue to work hard understanding that area and thinking through its implications with you, both collectively and with a number of you individually as well within the membership. But we know there are other choices out there. The franchise model is evolving. Block exemption may affect what you can do under a traditional franchise model too. But there's also the choice of fully owned direct sales channels. You know, we keep hearing of new entrants opting or thinking very carefully about actually a completely vertically integrated channel. So we want to look at the viability of that and whether it's a relevant choice for different types of player, what it might mean and how it would work for customers. And at the same time, continue our work looking at overall network trend, so through ECDH that we'll talk about tomorrow, the European Car Distribution Handbook, dealer group and investor consolidation, and we've recently published this year's dealer group top 50 ranking for Europe. You may have seen it in Automotive News Europe or come to our webinars, and what all those trends mean for channel roles, channel relationships, and even network structures as brands look towards maybe a smaller group of stronger network partners in future, and what that means for areas of responsibility, territories, and so on. So alongside that, as we said earlier, the EV dimension is very relevant. So we'll continue to look at the challenges and opportunities both EVs and other new technologies will bring to networks and distribution models, and also consider whether the new OEM entrants I mentioned a minute ago might change the distribution landscape by making their own sets of strategy choices. So lots of different dimensions in what's for us the kind of key integrating topic of future networks, future distribution models, and omnichannel strategy. So I've given you a very quick sort of whistle-stop tour of the issues we plan to cover under those three key themes and the four headings. And as we've said, this incorporates the feedback you've given us so far. We always welcome any further comments you might have, either on what we've just shown or more generally. I mean, are there things we've forgotten, things on your to-do list that you haven't seen reflected in what you've just been shown? Are there different perspectives that you think we should be considering? So you're welcome to submit those to us in any format you like. Once we've reflected and picked up a bit more comment, what we'll do now is then go on over the winter months to translate those four topics. So new and used cars and services, within that consumer behavior, the aftermarket, and thinking about future sizes, structures and strategies across franchised and independent sector players, regulation and omnichannel distribution models and network strategies. We'll go ahead and translate all those issues we've shown you into a program of work, into individual research topics for us and our team to work through. That also then feeds into our structured calendar of outputs, briefings, reports, publications of other sorts, and of course the meetings for the coming year. And that's something that I'll hand over now to Steve to tell us a little bit more about.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. One of the strong elements of feedback that we got from you overall, but particularly in terms of how we feedback the results to you, how we share that with you, was the desire to be able to pick up on webinars after the event, so to actually get the recording of the webinars. And we've always done that, but the current solution is a little bit clunky. Now that we're doing also more actual video interviews, like the ones that we did earlier in the year with Rockar and with Trevor Gordon, the dealer in BMW dealer in South Africa, then it's probably appropriate for us to look at improving the way in which we provide that. So we are going to enhance the video library in some way so that you can get not only those sorts of interviews, but also the webinars themselves on demand. We have sort of mixed feelings because clearly interaction is good, but I think like most providers, the actual interaction you tend to get on webinars is limited anyway compared to face-to-face meetings. So on balance, from a convenience point of view for you, and with that explicit request from many of you, then we'll put that library in and you'll be able to access the webinars and so on demand without having to go through Jane to send you a link and so on and so forth. We're just going to deal with the security aspects of it is the primary issue in picking a platform to offer that. So that's definitely coming as soon as we can organize it. If we then sort of look at beyond that, the broader situation, obviously we don't know what's going to happen either in terms of government restrictions related to COVID or your own company travel policies, either from a healthcare point of view or quite likely, I think, just from the lessons learned from COVID, they decide that actually you don't need to travel as much as you used to from both cost and sort of diary management perspectives. So the webinars definitely remain, and we will review the situation depending on your feedback in due course as to whether you are firstly allowed by your company policy to travel, and secondly whether you personally are happy to travel. And at that point we'll bring back in the the face-to-face meetings. I think the networking has always been considered one of the key attractions of ICDP membership. And so we will bring that back in as soon as we can, but it will depend very much on the feedback from you. We don't want to end up presenting to an empty room with all the costs that would involve. So given that, then the webinars will remain sort of the key channel for just now. Certainly most of the meetings will continue to be virtual, as they have been for the last couple of years. And we will, as we said, set up the video library so you can see them on demand. In terms of publications, then that will continue as before. There was a sort of fairly positive feedback for maintaining the mix that we currently have. So the assortment of executive briefings and management briefings, the occasional big report when we pull everything together, as we did for Dealer of Tomorrow, did for Aftermarket of Tomorrow, and Clean Slate is in progress. So it's started and will emerge, I guess, most likely in January, but it is in progress. And then we'll carry on the blogs, which you also seem to appreciate. So my sort of weekly blog is open to everyone. It's not restricted to members. The BER blog that Andrew has been doing, as and when there's been any updates, just to keep you up to speed on that, is only available to members, and that will remain the case. And then importantly, we appreciate the interaction that we get from you. When you just call us and say, do you know, what do you think, have you heard? So any questions where you're looking for data that you've not been able to find in any of the publications, or you just want a view, have we heard anything about a particular topic, or do we know anyone in a particular company, then we're here to help. So please continue to do that. It's important. And we're also happy to do the in-house meetings or webinars if you want to have a direct presentation of some of the materials that we've already presented, but to an internal audience, or an audience of your dealers, or an audience of your general managers, or your field reps, or whatever it is, then we're happy to do that. All of the publications, all of the meetings and the webinars and so on are there for any employee of your business. So again, also spread the word, get them engaged. You already paid the membership, or if you're thinking of joining, you will be paying the membership, and the resource is there. So spread it wide, get people engaged, get them thinking about what the future holds. The spring meeting will be our next main meeting. I'll go through the full calendar in a second, but that formally marks sort of the end of this year's program. So it's lots of tying up of loose ends, completing pieces of research that you may have had some update from us over the course of the year. And that will be the afternoon of Tuesday 16th and Wednesday 17th. So because of the timing, that will definitely be digitally. We're putting the plans together for that. We've got a couple of ideas for some guest speakers, as well as obviously presentations from the ICDP team. And as we said before, please spread the word, get your colleagues involved. Because it's digital, then easy for you to take part, and we'll publish the approximate timings in advance of the different presentations, so colleagues can, if they want, participate in only one or two sessions if those are the ones that are most relevant to them. So keep an eye out for that coming through, but in the meantime, please put the dates in your diaries and let your colleagues know as well. You can register now with Jane, and she will make sure you get all the information as it comes through. That's the calendar for the balance of the year as it stands. So the top one, put a big tick against that now. And then tomorrow, Pascal will take us through the key findings from the latest update of the European Car Distribution Handbook. Those of you who helped put that together will have received your copies already. And we know there's a few others have already bought their copies, but if you're interested, then you can get a preview tomorrow, and it is now available. In January, we've got a couple more webinars. So one looking at supply chain issues, and the other looking at the relationship between insurers and repairers in the crash repair sector. So that is sort of interesting. I've done a couple of the insurer interviews myself, so some idea of what we'll be coming up with there. And then in February, we're looking at sort of freedom of choice. So to what extent consumers are being sort of forced down particular routes by regulation and so on. Then the spring meeting, as I said, we've got the placeholders there for the summer meeting and the autumn meeting. So again, please get those in your diaries. With that, thank you very much, and appreciate your time. Again, any further input, please get back to us. Other than that, if we don't see you tomorrow for the ECDH webinar, then have a great Christmas, and best wishes for hopefully a much more normal 2021. Thank you very much, everyone.